And our final presentation is Lawrence Abu Hamdan. Lawerence is a private ear, listening to, with, and on behalf of people affected by corporate, state, and environmental violence. Abu Hamdan's work has been presented in the form of forensic reports, lectures, and live performances, films, publications, and exhibitions. And of course, Lawerence is an important member of our own community at Alserkal and beyond. I didn't know that you had a PhD, Lawerence. Dr. Lawerence.
There you go. Call me doctor.
And the presentation is entitled A Live Audio Essay, and we will be hearing today about the fact that the research for many of his artworks begins life as performance. And I think, we've heard a bit about voice or the absence of it in both presentations, so this is a nice way to bring voice back in.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation, Nada, and thank you everyone at 421, Mays, Faisal, yeah, it's great to be part of this. So performance is a key part of what I do. If you know my work, you know that I'm always in it, sometimes a bit too much, but but I'm always there in one way or another. Recently, I've been getting people to ventriloquize me just so people don't get Lawrence Abu Hamdan fatigue when they come see my works. But yeah, I mean, it's always been the way I've come to also know what I want to say through a work. Actually, performance is more kind of method for me than anything else. It's almost like there is a whole set of relations that I'm bringing into this thing that sometimes get concretized in the moment of a kind of installation. So when you see it as an installation, it's sort of a distillation of what I've come to as a kind of formulation of different kind of iterations of the work as a performance before it. And also, sometimes when I do that kind of distillation, I'm unsatisfied, so the work has a second life as a performance. So some of them still remain as performances, and when you see that I'm still performing, it's because I'm still working it out. And so, their works look something like this, or like this, or like this. And this is kind of like what I've come to describe as a live audio essay, because it's sort of a frustration with the word performance lecture, which just feel to me very vague, because lectures are performances, and vice versa. They can be really bad performances, but they're always a performance of a kind. So live audio essay is a kind of term I've used to kind of describe these kind of methods, me working it out. Live, because of course they're using the audience as a kind of means to do that working out process. Audio, because they're trying to often instill the conditions for listening to a certain set of voices, or the withdrawal of those voices, but certainly like listening is a necessary sort of part of the exercise. And essay, because they sort of move through a set of sometimes disparate connections. And the essay is really necessary for me to sort of, as I say, build these networks into what they would eventually be works. Sorry, it's confusing. But none of this kind of what sounding very kind of like high art would come without its foundation. So this is me actually in 2014 performing a work. Essentially, it's all to say that this is that place, that image is really the place where I learned to kind of like modulate intensities in a room. I learned there many things that really kind of bring me to the question of here in this panel, or in this days, because I don't think any of this would have been possible here. And I think that's an important thing to say. I mean, even to this extent, right? Maybe we're not even able to show this image of me playing as an 18-year-old boy. But and it was certainly not certainly unimaginable also in the context of Jordan, where I grew up. This was happening in the UK, and this was part of a kind of DIY community that I was part of, which was kind of vehemently anti-music industry. It was made sure that it had a kind of separate and autonomous economic model where all the money would go to musicians and artists and not to middlemen and promoters and these kind of things. They were often coming out of squats. You know, I feel like I slept on the floor of many places across the European continent. Some not so nice memories, some were fine. But also, you know, they're a place where kind of I learned this relation between aesthetics and politics, because there was a necessity to kind of self-organize. That was just kind of part of that situation. But also that came with it a set of aesthetic experimentations, right? That meant that things that I had previously not understood to be music or to be live performance, I understood after that could be, right? It wasn't the sort of stuff that I was being presented with. Having said that, it was also happening in spaces which were not necessarily comfortable with such activities going on, often in the back of some room where people were there casually, you know, enjoying, trying to enjoy a quiet night and these kind of things. So the kind of noise we were making was in contention with the spaces we were in. And I think that tension is something that teaches you a lot of things. It's not necessarily that I want to produce it, but I think performance emerges out of tension, as something what Najum Al-Ghanem was talking about a little bit earlier today. It's kind of like there's a necessary part of that, and when it's missing, I think we feel it instantly. So it taught me that, and it taught me also about these kind of sites and operating in these places. And I think, you know, though you may not see it, it's something that exists throughout the other works I'm making to this day, and specifically in relation to the sort of the site and the space of those performances. It's a question of how performance can kind of reorient them, and reorient them through a kind of non-linear also time, right? Return to and awaken things that have been assumptions for a long time in places. And so I want to talk to you now about a project called the Witness Machine Complex. And the Witness Machine Complex is a work I made, which is an installation, but it began its life as a performance, and also it really, as an installation, is a kind of set of small performances. And it's about these lights that were at the Nuremberg trials. I was originally asked to make a work responding to the 75th anniversary of Nuremberg. COVID made it the 77th. I was looking into the sort of archive, and, you know, initially you think, what can be said about this trial, you know, this sort of like big history. And I found this really interesting thing, that on the podium where the speakers would stand, where the prosecutors would perform, and where the witnesses would testify, you had a red and yellow light sitting on the podium. And these were the lights of the translators, to be able to control the flow of speech, right? You had this problem where the trial had to be translated into English, German, Russian, and French. And so these kind of moments where the translator could slow and basically set the pace of speech, interrupt the speech. So one flash of a red light meant for them to stop completely. Flashing of the yellow light set the kind of pace for which we wanted them to speak. And it was really interesting for me, because actually there was no other record of the translators whatsoever in this trial. You'd had one video of them staged doing the act of translation, but actually doing the work, they're not there, they're not in the recordings. And so the only real hint of their labor is in the kind of flash of these lights, of their presence. And I became really interested in that, because when I started looking at what those flashes were doing, they also spoke to not the sort of place of these testimony in history, but also the sort of the sort of, you know, I suppose it foregrounds the witness not only as kind of singular subjects with stories to tell, but people who must incorporate and overcome extraordinary forms of listening and extraordinary spaces in which their voices resound. And in some way, all testimony is a confluence of the story being recounted and the technologies and systems that mediate these voices. And this is where I come with this term that it's the witness machine complex. and sort of how to understand the kind of apparatus of the performance as a kind of means to access what it meant to become a witness in that space. Not necessarily what they were saying, but what it meant to be a witness there. And so, you know, I would find one case of that, and I would look into the transcripts of the archive, which is the subject of this panel. And I thought it would be kind of easy for me to identify where all these moments went, because every time the lights went off, there was a great kind of confounding, right? The witnesses kind of look around like, what's going on? It looks like it's kind of malfunctioning. And usually the judge or someone steps in and says, when you see those lights, they say a very British accent, when you see those lights over there, it means you have to stop or slow down. He's explaining this thing. And then that itself has to get translated. And so it kind of like, they always created a sort of moment of confounding arrest in the trial. And so all I had to do then, right, simple, done, artwork finished, put into the archive lights, yellow lights, right? And then I have all the moments where these lights went off, right? So I go there, genius, come to the archive, transcript, type in yellow lights, nothing. And then I type in lights, nothing. Right? I know I've heard the judge saying that the lights are there, right? I know that it's saying it. So it's really strange. And it seemed to me that all these moments, these interruptions, have actually been removed from the official transcript, right? And they kind of read as if it's this sort of smooth transition from voice to voice. But again, this kind of obfuscate the kind of very active performance from that space and actually kind of push you out of a kind of historical understanding. It doesn't kind of allow you in, it actually kind of pushes you out, right? And so what I did, I mean, interestingly enough, even though they're edited out, you see them here, they had, oh no, I'm controlling it here. Anyway, on the maquette in the trial, I'm going to speak about the museum in a minute of the Nuremberg trial, but you have these like little pins they've used to illustrate the lights, even though they're kind of obfuscated from the historical process. So basically, I kind of reinstated these lights. I kind of reanimated them as these moments in the trial where you would hear those moments of interruption. It would actually tell the story of the trial only through those interruptions. And basically, would reanimate exactly as the light went off in the trial in front of you with the speaker playing the sound into these kind of individual moments. And the room is also kind of trying to reinsert a certain kind of cacophony that was not present in the transcript, right? But the trial is actually a very noisy space, right? It's not a clean kind of site of historical production, but actually extremely noisy and alive. And so these are these kind of moments distilled into this installation called the Witness Machine Complex. I'm going to play you one clip from that, and I'm going to end with one last point. This is one clip of Marie Valiant-Coutière. What she's going to say is really disturbing. But also, what I'm asking you to pay attention to is the nature by which she is speaking it and by which the kind of apparatus modulate that. And what you're going to see is the moment the light went off is going to be animated as a little like image on the screen. Okay?
Une nuit, nous avons été réveillés par des cris effroyables, et le lendemain matin, nous avons appris par les...
You're going too fast.
Sorry. Une nuit, nous avons été réveillés par des cris effroyables. Nous avons appris le lendemain matin par les hommes qui travaillaient au Sonderkommando, le commando des gaz, que la veille, n'ayant pas assez de gaz, ils avaient jeté les enfants vivants dans les fournaises.
So you have this
Скажите, пожалуйста.
very strange performance, which is kind of like not really expected, right? The light comes on and she repeats verbatim where she was, exactly in this kind of what some people have described as a kind of robotic tone, but I don't think that's what's actually happening. I think this is a kind of masterclass in witnessing, a masterclass in performing. because she kind of returns, she understands and embodies that apparatus. And you see that in other places and times in the work that doesn't go so well, that the interruption comes and completely silences or mutes its subject. And so these moments are really important for me because in the installation, what happens is you hear this voice that is clearly from another history, another time. It has a kind of grain, a historical grain to it. But when the light goes off in front of you, and you hear its kind of effect in real time on that voice, right? Suddenly there's a kind of collapse in time. It brings you, again, into this kind of proximity with those voices, which are, which is really kind of the antithesis of the way in which that trial has been historicized on the ground in Nuremberg itself, where I was presenting the work. So this is actually the trial. This is actually the real courtroom that you can go to now. It's a kind of museum, and this is actually looking through the translator window. You can't actually enter that space. It's kind of exceptionalized and sacralized, and you can't actually enter it. So this is the kind of closest you can get. This is how it looked during the trials of 1945, and this is how it looks today, right? So there's a certain way in which you go to that museum, and there is no single physical artifact of that trial. You can't enter the space, right? The thing has been transformed into some kind of strange neoclassical site with a big crucifix on the wall. And all of the kind of technological kind of, advances that were being presented at the time seem to have vanished. There's no trace of that space. All you do is upstairs, in a kind of strange room, you have these light boxes, which just give a kind of textual description of what happened in the trial. Kind of like exhibiting a website. It's completely facile, right? And what you see there is that the work was entirely in kind of contention with the ways in which this had been actually historicized on the ground in Germany, and the ways in which they were allowing or a certain kind of proximity to this thing. There's a sense that it is being presented and dealt with, but actually all what they are producing with these forms of memorialization, with the archive, is distance. And I wanted to make a work that acknowledged that these interruptions, these moments of performance, were just as valid a historical artifact than anything else. And I will end there. Thank you.
Thank you. And